I'm Jace Falcor, and the issue I'm talking about today is LGBTQ rights in Texas. So HERO was the Houston Equal Rights Ordinance, which again was an anti-discrimination ordinance that was successfully passed and then was removed. I think it was removed by vote or repealed by vote was just simple lack of education. People didn't understand what it was, and that there was countless groups being included in this ordinance. All kinds of people who now don't have this protection either, not just transgender people, but that was the entire focus of the anti-HERO campaign. At the state level, the focus and the debate throughout the legislative session this year was bathroom access for people who identify as transgender or non-binary or some other gender non-conforming status. It's really easy politically, socially, to get people scared, especially about something they don't understand, something that's new, something unfamiliar to them. So that's why fear-mongering is a very common political tactic, because it works. And unfortunately, a lot of us on the liberal progressive side tend to be the kind of people who want to respond with logic and facts and data. And, oh, well, the crime rate, doesn't show that this is the thing. There have been no cases of people being molested in bathrooms. Like, none of this is real. But people don't respond to that. The fear has already been triggered. So they need an emotional connection. They need a story. They need a personal way and reason to care about it. Which is why I am excited about the work that Transform Houston is doing based on some solid research that was first done on the West Coast, where just going door to door and talking to your neighbors and talking to your fellow citizens about issues like this can change people's attitudes, can have an actual impact on bias and prejudice. I would hope that we, as a society, could grow and learn to such an extent where we recognize that gender is diverse, that it exists on a spectrum, that people look and act differently, and that doesn't mean that they are a threat to you. Practically speaking, I would like to see gender neutral facilities, or at least ones that are not specific only to male, female, binary. Because lots of people look differently. Even people who don't identify as transgender or non-binary have days where they don't look particularly feminine enough or masculine enough. And they have to deal with this too. Everyone has to deal with these expectations, not just trans people. So if we could really move past that and remove some of those stereotypes, that's what I would hope for.
I'm Eureka Gilkey. I am the executive director of Project Row Houses, and my issue is can we effectively implement anti-gentrification strategies to keep legacy residents in place? The issue is stuck right now. My belief is coordination, and I say that because there are just so many moving parts. Gentrification in and of itself is seen as like this race issue when it's really a class issue. Third Ward has been and continues to be, in my opinion, a microcosm of Black life in Houston. You have abject poverty to extreme wealth. You have political power center of the African American community, and those forces don't always come together in a cohesive, coordinated way to focus on one goal. So what we've tried to do, and why we intentionally set our boundaries to include what we would consider historic Third Ward, is because we felt like if we included greater Third Ward, one, all of the issues that are prevalent in and around Emancipation Park, where Project Row House is situated, doesn't necessarily translate to what's happening in the Bottoms or in Riverside Terrace, where I live. There's just a different set of needs. So if we just focus on on those boundaries, that we could focus on halting gentrification, which is feeling the most extreme and urgent effects in that neighborhood, then we could expand out. So we could really come up with some strategies that could be implemented, some shovel-ready projects to actually build some units, some job readiness programs. What can we do to bring businesses back to the area? And that's what the EEDC is focused on. I think artists have been very instrumental, and that's why, it was important that we had an arts and culture work group as part of the work groups of the EEDC, whether it's telling the story and taking the historical facts of what's happened in the neighborhood and highlighting that through work, bringing the community together through a design charrette. That's artists took the lead on that, like what does this neighborhood look like? Not only the typology of the buildings, but what's in those buildings. And artists were at the forefront of that, helping to tell the stories, but just being able to use your talents in a way that takes all of these top-line messages, in some cases white papers about policy, and making them accessible to the everyday people. If you're interested in joining this effort, and it's all about
My name is Malik Muhammad, also known as Malik the Movement. I am the National Vice Chair of Organizing and Training of the National Black United Front. We want to make sure that the resources that are guaranteed to our people actually reach our people who need them the most. Houston, the federal government, some of these well-known charities like the Red Cross have a long-standing history of neglecting our people as it relates to natural disasters. And we want to make sure that we take care of our own, because we are no longer depending on anyone to do for us what we can do for ourselves. So that is the main issue, is just making sure that our people receive the help and assistance that they need.
My name is Seconda Joseph. I am the Director of Smart Media and Activism with BLM-HTX. Our approach to the work is to do what we've always done. One is coalition building from day one. As a matter of fact, before Harvey ended, because we are the community. We had folks that we know who were trapped in Northeast Houston, who were saying, like, I'm stuck in water and I can't get out. What can I do? So we were looking for folks who could rescue people, and we noticed that the same zip codes continue to come up: 77078, 77028, 77026, 77016. This is all Northeast community, a community of nothing but like black and poor. They were forgotten then. And at the same time, we look at the news and we see, I guess you want to call it a public service announcement, and it said that the fire department was in Meyerland, was in West Houston, and was in Kingwood. The entire fire department. They were not in none of these areas. These areas, it's not the first time the areas flood. So it's not like, it's unknown that these folks would need help. But again, they don't receive the services that are due to them from government.
One of the ways we believe we can work better is for us to be proactive in our approach. And that means we have to be prepared. We need all hands on deck. We need all organizations to pitch in, to chip in, to participate, and be proactive as it relates to natural disasters and disaster relief efforts in the future. We were caught off guard, and some of us were so underprepared for this disaster. Our organization, our community We need to set aside money, we need training. We want to make sure that the next disaster, because there will be another disaster in the future, we want to make sure that our communities are equipped with the resources and the information to be as effective as possible during the next disaster.
My name is Brandy Holmes, and I am the Director of Community Organizing and Strategy with BLM-HTX. As we look at Hurricane Harvey and identify some ways in which anybody can be engaged in this process, and I think along with not just looking at Hurricane Harvey, but thinking about social justice issues as a whole, is that there are roles that everyone can play in the movement, in this work, et cetera. You don't have to be a person who is consistently out in the streets holding up signs at protests or any other sort of mechanism that traditional activism has been portrayed as or community organizing has been portrayed as. You can use any of the individual skills and talents that you have to make a change and make a difference and bring awareness and drive people to truth and contribution in these movements. There are so many different ways that artists, creatives, writers, dancers, whatever medium that you're thinking of creative imagination can exist in this space, because we have to think about how do we as individuals rebuild and assist our people in rebuilding these communities in ways that we haven't yet imagined. And that's the way that art really can help us in this process, to think of new ways to innovate. How do we build buildings that are sustainable buildings and environmentally friendly, that don't have a negative impact, environmental impact on these communities? Like, what are the different ways that we can imagine the spaces, the creative spaces, to drive about solutions in our communities? And so I think that's one way in which artists can be really just wonderful in assisting in that manner, just because the way in which the artist views the world is a lot different than the average person's, particularly myself. Just to watch even a photographer, their eye and their lens, what they can see and capture is really amazing. And so I think just having that different vantage point could be really impactful when we think about how do we serve our people and how do we serve the community at large.
Well, my name is Elizabeth Johnson, and I'm the Deputy Executive Director for the Houston Justice Coalition. One of the issues that we are trying to tackle here in Texas and in Houston is criminal justice reform. I know we're talking about having pretrial releases, meaning those individuals who are nonviolent offenders, making sure that since they're not a threat to the public, that they actually, they're released before, they're not in a holding cell. That's one of the issues we're trying to tackle. Another is just making sure that those individuals who are nonviolent offenders and are currently sitting in jail for, let's say, 5-10 years for something as minute as having an ounce of marijuana, that that they get out of jail as quickly as possible. There are a few politicians, there are a few individuals throughout the community who kind of just think that everything is okay the way that it is. So that's kind of where we're stuck. We're trying to get through to those judges, those police officers, or just individuals throughout the community who think that, well, if you do something this way, that, it should be, it'll go the right way, and that's not necessarily true. So I think it's just kind of getting through to people and helping them actually understand that there is a problem. It may not be as big of a problem here in Houston, but it's still a problem. So that's really where we're kind of stuck, just changing the way people think in regards to criminal justice reform, and that it's actually something that needs to be done. A lot of people think that if we actually have pretrial releases where we release some of the individuals who are nonviolent offenders, they feel that if they go out into the community, they're going to be dangerous. That's not necessarily the case, because they're nonviolent offenders. There are some states where they've closed a few prisons, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the population goes down. It actually has increased. So that's another misconception. With the past election that we had in November, where we elected District Attorney Kim Ogg, she's publicly stated that she's not for having a lot of nonviolent offenders in jail and reducing their crimes, especially when it comes to, if it's a drug charge or something like that. So that's definitely a step in the right direction. This past election, we also elected a lot of judges, new judges, not just, those individuals who have been in office for a while. Of course, in the 85th legislative session that just ended, there was the passing of the Sandra Bland Act. So that's amazing, and that's where if those individuals who are in jail, that we make sure that, they make sure that they're safe, and that other people are held accountable if something does happen to an inmate. So that's a step in the right direction. So I think here in Texas and Houston, we're doing wonderful things in order to progress. It's just kind of making sure that everyone's on the same page and everyone gets it.
My name is Oscar Hernandez. I am with United We Dream in Houston, and we fight for racial justice with the immigrant rights lens. Overall, in the U.S., the immigration system is broken. It's been broken for many years, and well, I think to say it's broken is almost to not acknowledge that it was designed in a way that doesn't allow a lot of people to be able to enter legally in the U.S. And right now, one of our current battles out of the many that have erupted in the last years is that DACA, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, was announced this year that it's been canceled. So there's a shift right now about what are we going to do with the over 800,000 undocumented youth who have this work permit, which includes me and almost all my coworkers, to what's the next thing that we can win to benefit our community. So our big push has been so far the DREAM Act, which is actually a DREAM Act was something that we've been fighting for as an organization since like the late 90s. And it's got halted multiple times once it got to the Senate, once in Congress, and it's been a big issue about how we move forward. But we have, we're in a different position we are today than we were in the past couple of years. So the new version of the DREAM Act, which we're fighting for a clean DREAM Act, is the way it's written right now. We have United We Dream undocumented immigrants have actually worked with some Congress people onto this legislation and how we're going to, and what it means and how it impacts our community. But what we want to make sure is the DREAM Act, as it stands right now, is open and might be implemented or might become a law by the end of the year or before March 5th of next year. So that's where our focus is right now. How do we ensure that all these over 800,000 undocumented youth have DACA, all this over 1 million who have applied and some of them were not granted DACA, like how do we make sure that there's a long-term protection that might include a pathway to citizenship? Our tactics, some of them have changed, some of them have stayed the same in how we move forward. We've always based the power of our movement on our stories, because that helps us communicate and connect at a human level with other people. And to me, that's why they've been so powerful in how we do in how we move together. Because someone might get involved for the movement, but they'll stay for you because you made that relationship. And what has also got me very excited is that we're at this place where we're no longer talking about dreamers. So what it means to be in the movement now is to encompass what it means to be an undocumented person. Because the dreamer was something that was developed for us. You know, it was a narrative. It's a merit-based idea. This dreamer, I mean, it already comes off the bat of a 4.0 GPA, amazing at college, wants to join the military. Like, that is a dreamer, and these are the good guys. But when the DREAM Act was introduced, even initially, I wouldn't have qualified. I've never been, I was never a student at a university. So I know I wouldn't qualify for any of that, and it wouldn't fit me into that category. It's such a small box. But what gets me way excited is that I hear that conversation from a lot of other people, you know, who are undocumented, who talk about, you know what, I don't fit the dreamer narrative, but I'm still undocumented, and I'm going to fight for me, my community, for students and parents and other people who don't fit that, because it's important to me. And to me, that is extremely powerful. And even in the beginning, when there was questions of like, well, there's just students, they're not criminals. Again, that type of mentality ends up making it's okay to deport these other people because, you know, they drove without a license, so they're definitely criminals. And we're moving away from that because it also talks about, you know, how the black community has been viewed as being criminal just for the color of their skin. So to us, it's important to recognize that the dreamer movement, as it was known, has moved into a space where we're trying to identify what it does mean to be undocumented, how do we have our title developed by undocumented people that is inclusive to the LGBTQ community, it's inclusive to other ethnicities that are more than just the Latinx community, and it doesn't have the age window that the Dreamer idea would be like, where it's just Dream Youth. I think that's what has been keeping me even more excited, hearing that from more people. And then how do we build that narrative together and know that it's really grassroots, that it came from documented voices to how we want to be seen and how we identify ourselves.
My name's Yvette Ariano, and I am a policy and grassroots advocate with Texas Environmental Justice Advocacy Services. I'm here on behalf of Juan Paras, who is the Executive Director of Tejas. The issue we're currently focused on is the RMP chemical disaster rule because it had a huge effect on all of our communities, environmental justice communities, strewn along the 16 miles of the Houston Ship Channel. And specifically, what happened in Arkema is directly tied to the RMP chemical disaster rule. The chemical disaster rule reinforces the rights that communities have a right to know. They have a right to know what types of chemical substances that they live next to, what volumes are stored next to them, how to properly evacuate. And they also push and enforce both chemical and oil refineries to assert themselves in the search for new alternative, safer technologies. So if there is a safer alternative to X chemical, it is their duty and their responsibility to find out what that alternative is, and then not only find it, but exercise it. So it focuses on chemical alternatives, on safer technologies, on improved communications between industry entities and community members. Our audiences, or the people that we're trying to make sure this information reaches, are community members, refinery workers, and public officials alike. We're also hoping that the EPA does keep an open ear. Is the possibility there? Yes, people in the communities can reach out to EPA Region 6, but what we're hoping is really to have the general public understand that this is for their safety, for their security, to reduce emissions, to search for those alternative technologies, and ultimately to reinforce a decision that's already been made. When we're talking about living in a first world nation, in a democracy that's supposed to be working, and we have the living conditions that we do in this city on the east side, where a public park is placed across an acid plant, there is no free will. There's complete control on one side, and powerlessness and hopelessness, or the feelings of that, on the other. Our work is difficult because we need to reassure our communities that hope is not lost, that we can still create change, and that it will happen for them and their children and generations to come. Because at the end of the day, we're struggling to survive.